Hello, welcome back. I'm Katy McKinney, the founder and head of school for Lafayette Academy, and you are at the Lady K podcast. Just so happy to be with you today. Today we're talking about phones, tech, and the influence and what we can do to counteract that. Lafayette is a phone-free school. That's actually a hot topic right now, and lots of states are making laws about phones and just trying to get a grasp or a handle on that. And so we think of ourselves being a phone-free school. It's not an act of controlling our students. It's an act of love, an act of caring about them, about the formation of who they are becoming. And that's why we've chosen to make sure that we are a phone-free school, to support that vision and to support parents in that vision. So today we're going to talk about that. Parents, of course, today are navigating something that no generation has had to navigate, and that is this influence of tech. Smartphones, social media, the constant barrage of connectivity has reshaped childhood. And today we are at the point that this has been in our lives long enough that we now have data to support the choices that we're making, for example, being a phone-free school. And it's this time right now, I know for me at least, I can speak for myself and my husband, that we have at times felt overwhelmed and just uncertain about how to manage this, somewhat conflicted. You want your children not be behind, that you want them to have the tools that tech offers so that they are going to be competitive when they get out into the real world. At the same time, you don't want them to become manipulated and overtaken mentally. And so that balance, and how do you do that? And no one's done this before. So we're all kind of figuring it out for ourselves. But I wanted to start about this idea that our school has chosen this to obviously not... we want to walk with parents. We want to partner with parents on this idea of creating conditions where our children can grow in wisdom and virtue and character and confidence. And our phone-free policy is one of those ways in which we can partner with parents. So we find that it's helpful now. We're no longer guessing. As I mentioned, we have data, we have research that is supporting us and explaining why this matters. And one of the books, we actually had a book club about a year ago, and we chose this book called The Anxious Generation by Jonathan Haidt. And we read it as a community. We include, it's actually part of one of our ways of connecting with each other. And so we read it. We had faculty members, staff members, parents, even donors be a part of this conversation, because we're all being influenced by this, hopefully, somewhat erroneously, but also we want to make sure that we can be, as my husband and I like to say, we don't want to be influenced, we want to influence. And so we want to be the catalyst for positivity. And so in any case, we read it as a community. It was a great eye opener, probably worth a reread because there's just so much in here. But one of the first points that Jonathan makes is that childhood has changed. And it is clear from the data, he cites that right around 2010, 2012, it was actually when the iPhone was introduced, that childhood shifted from a play-based childhood, from playing outside, riding our bikes, being in the woods, to and that sense of relational experiences with friends. And it changed to a phone-based childhood where screens were really driving the play. There was an algorithm behind that phone usage, and that was also driving the play. And this, interestingly, the data has shown us that the correlation is that there's been a surge in anxiety, there's been a surge in depression and self-harm and in suicide with the introduction of the iPhone, or I won't say specifically the iPhone, but the phone in general, and a decline in attention and in sleep and in resilience, mental resilience. And so that data is out there. It's clear. And so I hope, is waking parents up, because we're the ones, the gatekeepers, right, to this phone or no phone for our children. And the idea here is it's not about blaming parents. It's not about blaming children. It's about recognizing that the phone is a tool, hopefully, right? It's a neutral, it should be a neutral tool. I don't think it is at this point. We all have had times where we've had to pacify our children and we've leaned on the phone or the iPad. We're all probably guilty of that. However, it's something that we need to redesign to make sure that we're capturing our children in a way that's purposeful, that we're directing them in a way that's helping them develop their thinking, and that they're not being hijacked. So for us as a school, not having phones, what we're doing is we are restoring their sense of attention. I noticed in September, it's a lot of endurance building. We're reteaching them how to focus on a story, listening to a story when they're in the early elementary grades for 5 minutes, just learning how to do that. And eventually they can listen to a 15 or 20-minute story or a chapter being read out loud to them. But it takes restoring that attention span. We're also protecting silence. There's times where we will have just a moment of silence in the classrooms or during our morning assemblies. There's so much noise that happens in our day-to-day lives. And just sitting in silence can be such a restorative activity. Also, preserving the real human interaction. Our kids are talking to their teachers. They're establishing relationships with those teachers or with their peers. Interestingly, we had a student who came and visited us for a shadow day where they come in and visit for, just to see what life is like at Lafayette. And she was in 6th grade. And she ended up enrolling. But after her visiting day, we asked her, so how did you enjoy the day? And she goes, it was very different. And we said, how was it different? She goes, you all talk to each other here. And we're like, well, yeah, of course we talk to each other. She goes, no, at my school, we all have computers and we're always on our computers in every classroom and we barely talk to each other. And so that was a phenomena to her that we actually engaged in conversation. And that alone, because we're a phone-free school, computer-free school for the most part, until you get to the upper grades, we use it, and I'll talk about that later. It does solicit the student to be a participant in relationships and in conversations. And that alone is a great teaching tool. I've taken that for granted, to be honest. I completely think that's normal. And unfortunately, it's not normal. So those are some beautiful benefits to having a phone-free environment. It's not about restriction. It's about restoration in all those areas I just mentioned. Also, having a phone-free school is about virtue formation. There's a great article here, too. It was a Wall Street Journal article from 2022 citing Jonathan Haidt's thoughts on the national crisis of Gen Z. A great article, you can look it up. But it's this idea, he's warning us that social media is training us to be emotionally fragile. I would say for sure. It's also training us to have external validation, especially when you throw something out there on Facebook or Instagram and you're constantly checking how many likes, how many loves, how many responses, what's the interaction, all of that. And it's teaching us that our identity is based on performance. And again, that's social clicks and all of that gratification. And instead, we need to be thinking about where real growth happens. And that is actually through discomfort. As one of our previous guests, Marin, was talking about how she gets used to failing and somewhat being comfortable in that failing mode or having permission to fail so that she can grow. And she embraces that failing mode. And how important that is to grow is that sense of discomfort. Also taking responsibility. When you do fail, owning it and saying, okay, how am I going to get better at this? Social media and tech, there's not a lot of opportunity for responsibility. And in fact, it's the opposite. And the other thing is face-to-face accountability. In our school, when we have challenges, oftentimes, especially between peers, when we're doing reconciliation between peers, I will ask, do you mind if we bring all the players that need to be in this conversation together and let's have a restorative conversation? And oftentimes the students, knowing that they're going to get the support and having adults around them to support that conversation, they say, yes, I want to do that. And we'll sit around my conference table in my office and we'll have a great, healthy conversation. That is not happening. It doesn't happen online, of course. And our kids are missing out on being supplied with the right tools to have those restorative conversations that are necessary to have healthy relationships. So anyway, it's a great article that I encourage you to take a look at. Now, of course, when we are helping our students embrace discomfort, Iliad Athletics comes to mind when we have our great fitness program in the morning. Our kids are doing really hard things and they're actually enjoying the process. But in any case, we are teaching our children temperance, teaching them self-regulation. We're teaching them not to be impulsive, but rather embracing those hard conversations, doing physically something hard, having to get up and do a recitation in front of your class. Those are things that are very difficult, but our kids are growing because they are embracing those challenges. And that's growing in temperance, which is self-regulation, self-governance. We're also teaching our children to be prudent and learning to be wise and not reacting harshly. In fact, I talk a lot about the difference between reacting and responding. The word sponse, when you take it back to the Latin, means to think. And so response means to think again or to reflect, versus reacting involves no thinking whatsoever. It's just a physical act. And so we want to be thoughtful that we're teaching our children that we don't want to react, we want to respond. We want to be thinking. And prudence is involved in thinking. It's making wise decisions, reflecting on the past, and then taking that information or those lessons learned and then making a good decision for the future. We're also teaching our children fortitude, which is persevering or doing something hard, even if you're scared or even if something is very, very difficult, which, again, our previous podcaster talked about, that courage that it takes to face hard things. And we're also teaching our children justice, having real relationships and not having online outrage. It's easy to react online and really have no consequence and no accountability. And instead, that sense of justice is what is fair, what is appropriate for all involved in this situation. And that's when we're having those restorative conversations. That is true justice. It's saying, I'm sorry when you made a mistake. It's accepting someone's apology, saying, I forgive you. That is tremendous, beautiful justice. And those are things that are happening on a daily basis at our school. And I would say it's because we don't have phones. It forces us to sit around that table and look each other in the eye. A child cannot grow in fortitude or prudence or temperance if every moment of boredom is instantly escaped with a phone or with some sort of tech. We can definitely dodge discomfort when we put that phone in our hands. And so virtue requires us to be present. It requires self-sacrifice. And in that self-sacrificial moment, a tremendous sense of character is grown. And that's a wonderful thing. So by removing the phones during the school day, we're actually giving our students daily practice in self-mastery of those 4 beautiful virtues. And that is supporting rather than undermining their own work that they're doing at school, that they're doing at home, that cultivation of character. It's supporting all of that. Phones are also eroding the conditions necessary for deep learning. We want our children to have that opportunity, that sort of that sanctuary space to go deep in their thought. And in Haidt's research in The Anxious Generation, he cites that a phone can actually it can reduce your sense of memory or your working memory. I know, unfortunately, we've all, except for maybe our own phone number or our spouse's phone number or our children's, we don't, and I will say even our children's, I don't even know my children's phone numbers. Those of them who have phones. We don't allow phones until they're 16, but sadly, I don't know their phone numbers. I need to do that. I need to memorize my kids' phone. We have forgotten those things. Comprehension, our ability to comprehend things, the span, the attention that's required for comprehension has also been greatly reduced. And the depth of thought has been reduced because of our phone use. This is all backed by research. I think the other thing too is this constant switching of just task switching also reduces learning. We are asked to multitask all the time, and that allows us to only go surface deep. It's not very deep at all. And so we're not getting that depth of thought. In our school, which is a classical school that has a phone-free environment, we are actually supporting and nurturing sustained attention. Again, in September, October, you can see it. When they come back to school, the kids are squirrely. They don't have a great attention span. We have to re-fortify that. And so we spend a lot of time in September and October helping them just listen to stories out loud, allowing them to sit quietly, just getting their bodies to calm down. Classical learning depends on memory and comprehension. And so that sustained opportunity to increase their endurance in their listening skills and their reading skills and their taking their notes and their writing, all of that has to be refortified in September. But in a classical environment, in a phone-free environment, that is what we're doing. A child cannot enter into a Socratic discussion where there's a lot of Q&A, a lot of thoughtfulness without having thoughtfully read the material, without carefully writing in their mind what they're going to be thinking, what they're going to be talking about, if their mind is somewhere else. They've got to be focused in that moment. And so those are some of those conditions that are necessary if we're going to cultivate deep learning. So a phone-free classroom, a phone-free environment doesn't just protect our focus. It actually allows our child to be fully present, fully human during that school day. And I actually think, gosh, if I had the freedom to not have my phone with me during the day, how much work could I get done? That phone is definitely a distraction. And so, of course, having it on silent, which I often do, is a protection. It allows me to have that sanctuary of quietness so that I can do the deep thinking that's necessary to lead a school. But I think of it as a wonderful protection to our students to allow them the same type of space. So a couple of the questions we have gotten from parents is that, safety, emergencies, that kind of thing. They want their child to have a phone. So in case there was an emergency, they could get in touch with their child. And we totally understand that. And I will say, students do have their phones. It's in their backpacks. It's on silent. But the phones are not allowed in the classroom. So from that standpoint, should there ever be an emergency, the children could have their phone nearby. Yes. But we also have systems in place that allow us to operate in such situations so that we have direct communication to our parents, via email, via texting. Parents are contacted immediately if there ever was an emergency. And it also ensures that students always obviously have adult access. I tell them, in the olden days, you would walk to the nurse's office and the nurse would call your parents. We still do that today in our school. So we just tell them it was like in the olden days, but we do it still today. And that's another way that we can get in touch with parents if the child is not feeling well or whatnot. We still practice that. So we believe that students or phones do not make students safer during the school day, but strong systems and attentive adults make students safer. And so that's how we run the school. I also have parents say, well, kids need technology. We don't want them to get behind. We don't want them to walk out of your school having graduated and not know how to put a PowerPoint together. Okay, yes, of course, you're exactly right. And at the same time, we want our kids to be able to research papers and utilize the tools before us in a very prudent way so that they can be the drivers of the learning and the knowledge versus the tech being the driver. And so our school's intentional approach, especially the elementary level, is that we do not have computers in the classroom. There is no personal tech. Instead, the foundation is focused on handwriting. It's focused on reading. It's focused on attention, comprehension, those verbal presentation, speaking skills. All of that is very securely rooted during those elementary years. Then in middle school, we have occasional use of tech, but it's very purposeful. So it's really not brought out until about the end of 8th grade when they're working on their 8th grade speeches. The students are permitted to then do research and or put their papers into writing, typing it out. Otherwise, the students are using cursive and, again, handwriting. That's a whole nother conversation, which we'll get into another time. But just the purposeful use of tech for structured writing or research just barely begins to be introduced in that middle school timeframe. And then in high school, yes, now there's a deeper integration of tech. Again, though, very purposeful. The computers only come out at this point during their senior thesis or during, if they're going to do some research or presentations throughout high school. So during papers, during research, during critical thinking that they need to do, the computers will come out. Now, we are piloting a program called essay.app, and that's ESSAY.app. The way I think of it, it's a beautiful new program that bridges the gap between Google Docs and AI or ChatGPT. It's somewhat of an integration between the two. And what I love about it is it allows the students to do the research. You can pull in that research and have it right there before you as you're writing your paper. It forces, in AI or ChatGPT, you could say, give me 3 ways to say this one idea, 3 different ways. Instead, in essay.app, it requires the student, you provide 3 different ways to say this one idea. Again, preserving that critical thinking and really nurturing it within the student to do that critical thinking. It then helps the student, you might want to think about streamlining this idea a little bit differently. You might want to start this with a prepositional phrase. You might want to incorporate X, Y, and Z into this idea. It then supports the student in that way of enhancing their writing and their critical thinking. And then it says, okay, let's try option 2. Let's try option 2 in your paragraph. Let's see how that reads. Anyway, it's a fabulous tool. We're piloting it now in our high school senior thesis class. And that's a way we're using tech while preserving the critical thinking necessary for deep learning for our students. Not to mention, too, our kids are getting tons of tech at home. So we're not worried. Our kids are still way ahead. Even though they don't get tech in school, they're way ahead of most of the adults today, as we all know. That's exactly why our school is doing something different. We're definitely nurturing that. We always have, and we don't offer that sense of tech at school, for which I'm very grateful. So we have fewer screens at school. We have more conversation. We have more silence, and we have more real-world problem solving happening at our school. So I wanted to go back just real quick in the anxious generation here. That idea that our children have had their childhood altered from play-based childhood to screen-based childhood. And he says here that the addictive design of these platforms reduces the time available for face-to-face play in the real world. And the reduction is so severe that we might refer to smartphones and tablets in the hands of children as experience blockers. Thought that was interesting. And of course, a smartphone opens up the world to new possibilities, new experiences, including video games, which obviously is a form of play, but and the virtual long-distance friendships. However, all of these tech experiences, that's my wording, back to the book though, but all of this happens at the cost of reducing the kinds of experiences that humans evolved for and that they must have in abundance to become socially functional adults. And I think that's where a classical education, a phone-free environment like ours is making sure that our children have in abundance quiet time. They have in abundance the opportunity to talk with and have relational experiences with their peers and their teachers. They have opportunities for deep thinking. And so our phone-free policy is not out of nostalgia. It's not out of fear. It's about love. It's love for childhood. It's love for those relationships, love for learning, the kind of love for adults, just love for each other. And that's what we're hoping our students will cherish, is that type of environment. So if you're doing it at home already, kudos. If there's work to be done, I'll raise my hand. We all have opportunities to grow in how we manage our tech for our children, and giving them the tools so that they are equipped, so that when they have this tech at their fingertips 24/7, they know how to manage and regulate and self-discipline because they've been taught how to do that. And they've been taught how to love the environment that they are surrounded in when they don't have phones, and how joyful that can be as well. So hopefully this has been a helpful conversation. If you haven't checked out The Anxious Generation, I highly recommend it. Anything by Jonathan Haidt is wonderful, but I wish you all the best in your journey. And if you have ideas, comments, would love to hear your ideas of how you're integrating, perhaps managing tech in your own household, because we can all learn together and support each other. Thanks for being on this episode of the Lady K Podcast, and we'll see you next time.